In a small town where life moved slowly and people knew almost everything about each other, there lived a quiet woman named Lena. She worked at the local school as a janitor, cleaning classrooms, sweeping hallways, and making sure everything looked neat before the next morning. To most of the teachers, she was simply part of the background, someone they greeted politely but never really talked to. Every day she wore the same simple clothes and carried her mop and bucket through the same long corridors. But behind her calm eyes and gentle smile, there was a story no one knew. Lena wasn't always a janitor. Years ago, before life took an unexpected turn, she had been someone else, someone with dreams, someone with music in her soul. But life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes the hardest moments push people into silence. For Lena, that silence came after losing everything she once loved. The piano, the stage, the applause, all of it disappeared, leaving her with nothing but memories she had locked away deep inside her heart. Every morning before sunrise, she walked to the school with a small thermos of tea in her hand. The air was cold and crisp, and she liked the quiet of early mornings when no one was around. As she cleaned the classrooms, she sometimes paused near the music room. Through the small glass window, she could see the grand piano sitting in the center of the room covered with a white cloth. Even from a distance, it seemed to call out to her. There was something about its presence that stirred something deep inside, a part of her she had tried to forget. When the teachers arrived, the school filled with noise, children laughing, doors opening, and the sound of shoes against the floors she had just polished. Lena moved quietly through the crowd, careful not to get in anyone's way. She smiled politely when people greeted her, but she rarely spoke more than a few words. Most teachers saw her as a shy woman, perhaps uneducated or simple, someone who had accepted her lot in life. They had no idea that behind her silence was a woman who had once played music that could make people cry. One of the teachers, Mr. Brown, often used the music room for his lessons. He was proud of his students and believed music should be reserved for those who worked hard and studied theory. To him, talent without discipline meant nothing. Sometimes, when he saw Lena pass by the music room, he wondered if she even understood the beauty of classical compositions. He never imagined she could actually play. After school hours, Lena always stayed behind to clean. When everyone left, she enjoyed the peacefulness that filled the empty halls. It was during those quiet hours that she sometimes let herself dream again. She would walk into the music room, uncover the piano, and just stand there staring at it. Her hands would tremble slightly, remembering the feeling of smooth ivory keys beneath her fingers. But she never dared to play a single note. The fear of stirring old pain stopped her every time. Her life outside of school was simple. She lived in a small one-room apartment above a grocery store. The walls were thin, and the only sound she often heard was the soft hum of the refrigerator. On weekends, she would visit the local market, buy fresh vegetables, and sometimes watch children playing on the street. When someone asked her about her hobbies, she always said she liked to read or take walks. She never mentioned music. It was easier to pretend it didn't exist. But sometimes music found its way back to her without warning. Once, while she was cleaning, she heard a student practicing a piece she used to play long ago. The familiar melody made her stop in her tracks. Her heart tightened and she closed her eyes. The sound brought back memories of her younger days, the soft lights of the concert hall, the warm applause, the proud smile of her old teacher. She stood there for a few seconds, lost in time, until the student missed a note and the spell broke. She quietly returned to her work, pretending nothing had happened. The teachers often talked about her when she wasn't around. They thought she was strange, too quiet, too distant. Some pitied her. Others simply ignored her. No one asked about her past because they assumed she had none worth knowing. To them, Lena was just an ordinary woman, someone who belonged in the background while they prepared their students to shine on stage. But Lena had something none of them could see, a deep, natural understanding of music. Even though she hadn't played in years, she could still hear every mistake when students practiced. Sometimes she would pause outside the door, listening to a wrong note, whispering the correct one under her breath. Her ears were sharp, trained by years of passion and discipline. Yet she never corrected anyone, never said a word. She just kept walking, letting the sound fade behind her. There was one day when the weather turned cold and rain poured nonstop. Most students left early and only a few teachers stayed behind. Lena went from room to room, mopping the floors and making sure no one slipped on the wet tiles. When she reached the music room, She saw Mr. Brown and a few teachers gathered around the piano. They were laughing and talking about an upcoming event, a charity concert that would feature some of their best students. Lena quietly cleaned the back of the room while they spoke, trying not to draw attention to herself. Mr. Brown mentioned that the students were struggling with a difficult piece. He said it required not just practice but real feeling, something even his best students couldn't quite capture. One of the teachers noticed Lena standing nearby and said jokingly, "Maybe she can try it." The others laughed. Lena looked up surprised and smiled politely. She didn't respond, just kept wiping the floor. "Come on, Lena," another teacher teased kindly. "Why don't you play something for us?" She shook her head gently, saying, "Oh, I don't play. Not anymore." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the rain tapping on the windows. They didn't take her seriously. They thought she was just being modest. Mr. Brown laughed and said, "It's okay, it's not easy even for trained players. This piece isn't something just anyone can play." Lena simply nodded and continued cleaning, but as she passed the piano, she let her fingers lightly touch one of the keys. The note echoed gently, pure and haunting. For a brief moment, the room went quiet. There was something about the sound, something that hinted at control and experience. Mr. Brown looked at her curiously but didn't say anything. She smiled faintly and left the room. That single note stayed in his mind long after she was gone. In the days that followed, Lena continued her work as usual. The teachers forgot about the small moment in the music room, but she couldn't. That one note had awakened something inside her. Each time she walked past the piano now, she felt a growing urge to sit and play again. But she fought against it. She told herself that chapter of her life was over. She was just a cleaner now, not a musician. People had expectations of her, and she had learned to stay in her place. Yet at night, when the world was asleep, she would sometimes imagine herself sitting at the piano again. In her mind, she played softly, letting the notes fill the empty silence of her small apartment. It made her heart ache, but also brought her comfort. She realized that no matter how hard she tried, music would always be a part of her, like a quiet voice that never stopped whispering inside her soul. No one at the school knew how much strength it took for her to stay silent every day. They didn't see the struggle behind her calm smile, the way her hands sometimes twitched when she heard a beautiful melody. They didn't know that the woman sweeping the floors had once performed on a grand stage, wearing a gown instead of a uniform, receiving applause instead of polite nods. They only saw what was in front of them, an ordinary woman with tired eyes and gentle manners. But life has a way of revealing hidden truths at unexpected times. And for Lena, that moment was coming soon. The same teachers who once saw her as invisible would soon be forced to see her in a different light. The piano that sat untouched in the music room would soon become the key that unlocked her past and changed how everyone saw her. For now, she remained quiet, sweeping the hallways of the school as if nothing in the world could disturb her calm. But inside, the music was already awake, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. The rain had stopped the next morning, but the air still smelled of wet earth and old wood. Lena arrived early as usual, her shoes slightly damp from the puddles along the road. She carried her small lunchbox, placed it neatly in the corner of the staff room, and began her routine. Everything looked the same, yet something inside her felt different. That one small note she had played the day before kept echoing in her mind. It had awakened something she thought was gone forever. The teachers arrived one by one, talking about the upcoming charity concert. The event was supposed to raise funds for new school equipment, and the music department had decided to make it grand. They wanted their best students to perform in front of guests, parents, and even a few important people from the town council. Mr. Brown seemed excited but also stressed. His students were struggling with the complex piano pieces he had chosen. The pieces were too hard for most of them, and he worried the concert might not go as planned. Lena overheard some of their conversation while sweeping near the music room. The same melody they talked about played softly in her head. She knew it by heart. Years ago, she had performed that very composition in front of hundreds of people. Back then, her fingers had moved with such freedom and joy. Remembering it now brought a bittersweet ache to her chest. Later that afternoon, while most students were gone, Lena entered the empty music room to clean. The piano sat quietly in the middle, its black surface reflecting the dim light from the window. She gently wiped off the dust and adjusted the stool. Her eyes lingered on the keys. Her hands itched to play, to feel that connection again, the one between her soul and the sound. But she reminded herself she was only there to clean. Nothing more. She took a deep breath and turned to leave. But then something inside her said just one note. She sat down, pressed a single key, then another, and before she realized it, her hands were moving on their own. Soft notes filled the room, rising like whispers from the past. The sound was warm, alive, and full of emotion. For a few precious minutes, she forgot where she was. She forgot who she had become. All that mattered was the music. It was like meeting an old friend again after many years. When the final note faded, Lena froze. The silence that followed felt heavy. She stood up quickly, afraid someone might have heard. She covered the piano again and walked out quietly. What she didn't know was that someone had indeed been standing by the door. Mr. Brown. He had returned to the room to pick up his notebook and had stopped when he heard the music. For a moment he thought it was a recording, but then he saw Lena at the piano. He didn't interrupt. He just listened in awe. Her playing had been flawless. Not the kind of skill one learned casually, but the kind that came from years of dedication and heart. After she left, he remained there for a while, staring at the piano. His mind was full of questions. How could someone like her play like that? He had never seen her touch the piano before. The sound she produced was not just accurate. It was filled with something rare, real emotion. He couldn't stop thinking about it even after he went home. The next day, he approached her during lunch break. She was sitting outside, sipping tea near the garden where the roses bloomed. He walked up to her and said, "Lena, may I ask you something?" She looked up, surprised that he was talking to her directly. "Of course, sir," she said quietly. He hesitated before continuing. "Yesterday, I heard someone playing the piano." "It was you, wasn't it?" Lena's hand froze mid-air, still holding the cup. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she gave a small nod. Mr. Brown's eyes softened. "You play beautifully. That piece is difficult even for experienced musicians. Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago. I used to study music when I was young." He seemed surprised. "Really? Were you a performer?" She smiled faintly but didn't answer. Some memories were still too painful to share. After a short silence, she said, "Life took me in a different direction." Mr. Brown nodded slowly. He could see there was more to her story, but he didn't want to push. Still, curiosity got the better of him. "Would you consider helping some of the students? They're struggling with that same piece you played." Lena shook her head immediately. "Oh no, sir. I'm not a teacher. I just clean the rooms. It wouldn't be right." "But you understand music better than most," he said gently. "Sometimes experience matters more than titles." She smiled kindly but refused again. "Thank you, but I'd rather not." Then she stood up, finished her tea, and went back to work. Mr. Brown watched her leave, still intrigued. Something told him that Lena was hiding more than just talent, perhaps a story filled with pain and sacrifice. He decided not to press further, but deep down he knew he would not forget what he had heard. Over the next few days, Lena tried to act as if nothing had happened, but it was hard. Every time she entered the music room, her heart beat faster. The piano had become like a magnet, pulling her closer even when she resisted. She could still feel the warmth of the keys under her fingertips. Music had awakened something inside her that she couldn't silence anymore. Meanwhile, Mr. Brown couldn't stop talking about the mysterious pianist he had overheard. He mentioned it to a few other teachers, and soon curiosity spread across the staff. Some of them didn't believe him at first. "Lena, the janitor?" they said in disbelief. "Are you sure it wasn't a recording?" But Mr. Brown insisted he had seen it with his own eyes. A few teachers laughed, saying maybe he was imagining things, but deep down, a seed of curiosity began to grow. A few days later, fate decided to play its own tune. One of the music students fell ill, leaving a big gap in the upcoming concert lineup. Mr. Brown was worried. They needed someone to fill in quickly, even just for practice. During a staff discussion, one teacher joked, "Why don't we ask Lena? I heard she's secretly a master pianist." Everyone laughed except Mr. Brown, who didn't find it funny at all. But the idea stuck in their minds. Later that day, while Lena was cleaning near the staff room, two teachers approached her. They smiled kindly. though there was a playful tone in their voices. "Lena, we have a challenge for you," one of them said. She looked up, a little confused. "A challenge?" "Yes," the other said. "We're preparing for the concert, and we thought it might be fun if you tried one of the pieces." "Just for a moment, nothing serious." Lena blinked. "Oh, I don't think I can. I'm not—" "Come on," the teacher interrupted lightly. "It'll be fun. You can just play a few notes." She hesitated. The old fear returned, the fear of being seen, of being judged. But something inside her, that same quiet courage that had once guided her hands on stage, whispered that maybe it was time. She nodded slowly and said, "All right, just for a moment." The teachers led her to the music room, where a few staff members were still chatting. Mr. Brown was there too. When he saw Lena walk in, his heart skipped a beat. He knew what was about to happen. He wanted to stop them, to tell them not to treat her like a joke, but he stayed silent. Maybe this was the moment she needed. Lena sat down at the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys. The teachers exchanged amused glances, expecting to hear something clumsy and uncertain. But when she started playing, the room changed instantly. The first few notes were soft and fragile, like a whisper, but then they grew stronger, fuller, more confident. The melody poured out of her like a story she had been waiting to tell for years. Every sound carried emotion, sadness, beauty, strength. The laughter stopped. The teachers stood still, their expressions frozen. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. This wasn't just talent. This was brilliance. When the final note faded, silence filled the room. No one moved or spoke for several seconds. Lena lowered her hands slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't look up right away. When she finally did, she saw their faces: astonishment, respect, and even guilt for having underestimated her. Mr. Brown stepped forward first. His voice was quiet but full of emotion. "That was incredible." Lena gave a shy smile and stood up. "It's just an old piece I remembered," she said softly. But everyone in the room knew it was much more than that. In those few minutes, Lena had transformed from an invisible cleaner into something extraordinary. A hidden genius who had just reminded them that greatness can live in the most unexpected people. From that day, nothing at the school felt the same. The teachers couldn't stop talking about the moment she played. Some felt embarrassed, others deeply inspired. As for Lena, she went back to her duties quietly, but something inside her had changed forever. The music she had buried was alive again, and this time it wasn't going to fade so easily. After that unforgettable moment in the music room, everything around Lena began to shift. It wasn't sudden or loud, just small changes that she could feel in the air. People who used to pass by her without a glance now looked at her with a kind of quiet curiosity. The teachers who once treated her as invisible began to greet her with genuine warmth. Even the students whispered about her, calling her the piano lady. But Lena didn't seek attention. She still did her work as usual, sweeping floors, wiping desks, and polishing windows. The difference was inside her. Something that had been asleep for years was finally awake again. Mr. Brown, however, couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Her performance had been beyond anything he expected, even from professional musicians. He kept replaying it in his head, the smoothness of her hands, the emotion in every note. He realized that Lena wasn't just talented. She was exceptional. The way she played showed not only mastery but also deep understanding, something that came only from years of passion and experience. He decided he couldn't let that gift go unnoticed again. One afternoon, he found Lena cleaning near the music hall and approached her carefully. "Lena," he said kindly, "I've been thinking about what happened the other day. You played beautifully, truly beautifully." Lena smiled shyly and replied, "Thank you, sir. It was just something I remembered from long ago." He shook his head. "No, it wasn't just something. That was art. I don't think even our best students could have played it like that. I'd like you to consider something. Would you come and help me with the students? Maybe guide them a little? Show them how to express emotion through music?" Lena looked down, unsure. "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not a teacher, Mr. Brown. I don't have the right to stand in front of students. But you have something that can't be taught from books," he said softly. "They could learn so much from you. Please think about it." She didn't give an answer right away. Instead, she nodded politely and returned to work. But his words stayed with her. The idea of helping the students filled her with both excitement and fear. It reminded her of a time when she used to mentor younger pianists, before her life had fallen apart. That night, when she returned home, she couldn't sleep. She sat near the small window of her room, watching the faint lights outside. Her old piano, covered with a thin sheet, stood in the corner. She hadn't touched it in years, afraid it would bring back too many memories. But that night felt different. She walked over, removed the cover, and sat down. The keys were dusty, but her hands knew what to do. Slowly, she began to play. The sound filled the quiet room like a whisper from her past. She closed her eyes, letting her emotions flow through each note. It was as if the years between then and now had vanished. Tears filled her eyes as she played. She remembered her younger self, a girl full of dreams, playing in front of audiences, believing music would carry her anywhere. But then life had changed. Her mother fell ill, and Lena had to take care of her. Money became tight, and soon her music career slipped away. The dream that once defined her faded into a distant memory. But now, after all this time, she was sitting here again, playing not for fame or applause, but for herself. And it felt right. The next morning, she went to school with a quiet sense of purpose. She decided she would help just a little. When she told Mr. Brown she was willing to assist, his face lit up with relief and gratitude. "That's wonderful news, Lena. The students will be thrilled," he said. But she made him promise not to tell anyone about her past. She didn't want to be treated differently or pitied. He agreed, understanding her wish for privacy. That afternoon, Lena entered the music room as the students gathered. They were surprised to see her there. Some whispered to each other, unsure what was happening. Mr. Brown smiled and said, "Everyone, this is Lena. She's going to help us prepare for the concert. She has a special way of understanding music, and I want you to learn from her." At first, the students were hesitant. To them, she was still the janitor who cleaned their classrooms. But when she sat down at the piano and began to demonstrate, their doubts vanished instantly. Her playing carried emotion that reached beyond the notes. The students listened, wide-eyed, as she explained in simple words how to feel the music instead of just reading it. "Music isn't just about playing fast or getting every note right," she said gently. "It's about telling a story. Every piece has a heartbeat. You have to listen for it." Her words struck something deep within them. Slowly, the atmosphere changed. The students began to respect her not as a janitor, but as a mentor. They asked questions, sought her advice, and practiced with more feeling than before. Lena found herself smiling more each day, her heart warming as she watched them grow. Days turned into weeks, and the concert drew closer. The students improved greatly under her quiet guidance. Mr. Brown noticed how their performances carried more soul, more depth. He often stood in the back of the room watching Lena work, amazed at how naturally she connected with the students. She never raised her voice, never criticized harshly. She taught through kindness and patience, through the way she played and spoke. Everyone could sense her love for music and for them. One afternoon, after the students had left, Mr. Brown approached her again. "You've changed everything here," he said sincerely. "I don't think you realize how much you've done for these kids. You brought something to this school that we were missing." Lena smiled softly. "Maybe they helped me too. I had forgotten what music could do for the heart." He nodded, touched by her words. "You belong with music, Lena. You always did." She didn't respond right away, but inside she knew he was right. Music was her home, and somehow, life had brought her back to it. But while things were going well at the school, Lena still carried a quiet sadness within her. Late at night, after everyone had gone home, she sometimes stayed behind, playing alone in the empty music room. Those moments were her escape. The notes echoed softly against the walls, carrying her emotions, the joy, the pain, the longing. She didn't realize that sometimes others were listening from outside the door. Students passing by would stop and listen, mesmerized by her playing. They said it felt like the piano was crying and smiling at the same time. Word spread quickly, and soon people began to talk again. Some said she must have been a professional once. Others guessed she had studied in famous places, but no one really knew. Lena never confirmed anything. She just smiled whenever someone asked. As the concert approached, Mr. Brown had an idea. He wanted Lena to play one small piece during the event just to honor her gift. When he told her, she shook her head immediately. "No, I can't. It's their moment, not mine. But it would mean so much to everyone," he insisted. "You've inspired these students. You should be part of that stage." She smiled sadly. "I've had my time on stage. Now it's theirs. He didn't argue further, but he secretly hoped she would change her mind. On the night before the concert, Lena stayed late to help tune the piano and make sure everything was perfect. The hall was quiet except for the sound of her soft humming. She ran her fingers gently across the keys one last time, playing a simple, tender melody. She didn't know that Mr. Brown was standing by the doorway, watching her with quiet admiration. When she finished, he walked up and said softly, "If you ever decide to play again, the world will be lucky to hear you." Lena smiled faintly. "Thank you. But maybe it's enough that I got to feel it again." When she left that night, she looked up at the stars. The cool breeze brushed against her face, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. She had thought her music was lost forever, but now she knew it had simply been waiting for the right time, the right place, and the right people. What she didn't realize was that fate wasn't done with her yet. The concert the next evening would bring another surprise, one that would once again change how everyone saw her. For Lena, life had finally started to sing again. The room was completely still after the last note faded. No one said a word. The teachers who had been laughing only moments earlier stood frozen in disbelief. Lena sat quietly at the piano, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the emotion that had risen inside her. She hadn't touched a piano in years, and now the sound had awakened a part of her that had been asleep for far too long. She looked down at the keys, as if they were old friends she had just met again after years apart. The teachers exchanged awkward glances. One of them finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked softly. His tone completely changed. Lena looked up at him, her eyes uncertain. For a few seconds she hesitated, unsure if she should answer. Then she said quietly, "I used to study music. Long ago." Her voice was calm but carried a sadness that everyone in the room could feel. The teacher blinked in surprise. "You studied music? Professionally?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I went to a conservatory when I was younger. Piano was everything to me. But life doesn't always go the way we plan." The room stayed silent again. Another teacher, still amazed, asked, "So why are you working here?" It was an innocent question, but it struck deep. Lena smiled faintly, a smile filled with stories she hadn't told. "Because sometimes life changes faster than you can catch it," she said softly. "My father became ill and I had to help at home. I left school and the years just kept moving. I needed work, and this was what I could find." Her words touched everyone. The teachers, who just minutes ago had seen her as an ordinary cleaner, now stood humbled. They realized how easily they had misjudged her, how quickly they had laughed without knowing her story. One of them murmured, "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to." But Lena stopped him with a gentle shake of her head. "It's all right," she said kindly. "You didn't know." The music teacher looked at her hands, still resting on the piano. "You haven't lost your touch," he said in disbelief. "That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard." Lena lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the compliment. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think I could still play like that." At that moment, a small group of students who had been passing by stopped at the door, having heard the music. They peeked inside, their faces filled with curiosity. "Who was playing?" one of them asked. When they saw Lena sitting at the piano, their eyes widened. They had seen her every day pushing her cleaning cart, mopping floors, wiping windows. None of them could imagine she could play like a professional musician. The teacher smiled faintly. "It was her," he said, gesturing toward Lena. The students stepped closer, impressed and silent. One of them whispered, "That sounded like something from a movie." Lena chuckled softly, her cheeks warming with color. "I just played what I remembered," she said modestly. For a while, everyone remained in the music room, unable to leave. Something magical had happened there. The teachers began asking her questions, not out of politeness but genuine admiration. "Do you still practice? Have you ever performed on stage? Would you consider teaching again?" Lena answered patiently, though part of her felt overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this attention. She had spent so many years trying not to be noticed, and now suddenly all eyes were on her. As she stood to leave, the music teacher stopped her. "Lena, would you mind coming back tomorrow? Maybe you could help some of the students with their finger placement or timing. You clearly have a gift." She hesitated. "I don't know. I'm just a cleaner here," she said quietly, but he shook his head firmly. No, you're much more than that. Talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden. Her heart felt full and confused at once. It had been years since anyone looked at her as more than a worker in the background. She smiled faintly, unsure what to say. I'll think about it, she finally whispered. As she left the room, she could still hear the whispers behind her. Students telling each other how incredible she was. Teachers replaying her performance in their minds. For the first time in many years, Lena didn't feel invisible. That evening, as she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Her hands still tingled from playing. The notes echoed in her head like soft memories. She had forgotten how alive music made her feel. When she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window and looked out at the quiet street. The world outside was ordinary, but inside her, something extraordinary had awakened again. She closed her eyes, remembering the applause she once received on stage as a young girl. It had felt just like that moment in the school, unexpected, real, and full of emotion. The next morning, she arrived early at the school. She passed the music room and stopped at the door. The piano stood there silently, sunlight touching its surface. She couldn't resist stepping inside. She sat down and began to play softly, just a few gentle notes. They filled the empty room, wrapping her in warmth. She didn't notice the principal walking in behind her. He listened quietly, amazed. When she turned and saw him, she stood quickly. "I'm sorry, sir, I was just—" He smiled and raised a hand. "No need to apologize." "That was wonderful." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I heard what happened yesterday. You surprised quite a few people." She nodded shyly. "I didn't mean to. They just asked me to play and I couldn't say no." The principal nodded. "Sometimes the most beautiful things happen when we don't plan them," he said with a kind smile. "Would you consider performing at our next school event? The students could learn so much from you." Lena felt a rush of emotion. "Me, perform? I don't know if I could." The principal laughed softly. "If you could do what you did yesterday, then you certainly can. Think about it." He left her with a smile, and she stood there staring at the piano once more. Part of her was afraid of stepping into the spotlight again after so long. But another part of her deep down wanted to. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her. It was a voice she had lost and just found again. Later that day, the same group of teachers greeted her with warmth and excitement. The teasing tone was gone. In its place was admiration. They offered her a cup of tea, asked her to sit with them, and spoke as equals. For Lena, it was a strange but beautiful feeling. She realized how much one moment of truth could change everything. It reminded her that people sometimes need to see before they can believe. As the day ended, she walked through the hallway with a quiet smile. Students passed her and whispered, pointing with smiles of recognition. The woman who once blended into the background had become someone unforgettable, not because she wanted attention, but because her hidden light had finally been seen. That night, she opened an old box she had kept for years. Inside was a photograph of her sitting at a grand piano, much younger, full of hope. She touched the picture gently. "Maybe it's time," she whispered to herself. Time to play again, not just for others, but for her own heart. The tears that fell were not of sadness, but of something far more powerful, the joy of rediscovery. As the stars shone outside, Lena knew one thing for sure. Her story with the piano wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun again. The woman who once swept floors was now sweeping through hearts one melody at a time, and though she didn't yet know what would come next, she felt ready to face it, with her hands, her heart, and her music leading the way. The next few days at school felt different for Lena. Everywhere she went, people smiled at her, waved, or stopped to ask about her music. The same teachers who once barely noticed her now greeted her warmly every morning. The students whispered her name in the hallways, calling her the piano lady or the hidden genius. She didn't quite know how to handle all the attention. For years, she had been invisible, part of the background. Now suddenly everyone wanted to talk to her. At first, she tried to keep her routine the same. She still carried her cleaning cart, mopped the floors, and made sure every classroom looked neat. But wherever she went, someone would ask her when she was going to play again. One day, the principal caught her in the hallway and asked if she had thought about performing at the school concert. She hesitated but nodded slightly. Deep down, she wanted to play again, but she was scared too. It had been so long since she had performed in front of people. What if she wasn't as good as before? What if she failed? That evening, she sat by her small kitchen window, a cup of tea warming her hands. The memory of the piano keys still danced in her mind. The principal's words echoed softly. "Would you consider performing at our next school event?" She stared at her reflection in the glass. Could she really do it? Could she face an audience again after all these years? A tiny smile formed on her lips as she whispered, "Maybe it's time." The next morning, she arrived at the music room earlier than usual. The piano stood quietly waiting. She ran her fingers over the smooth keys, feeling their familiar touch. Her heart beat faster, but in a good way. She took a deep breath and began to play. The sound filled the empty room, warm and clear. It was as if the piano was speaking to her, telling her that she still belonged to the music world. She closed her eyes and let her hands move freely, not worrying about mistakes. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Unbeknownst to her, one of the teachers walked by and stopped at the door, listening. He didn't say anything, just stood there watching her play with pure emotion. When she finally finished, he clapped softly. Lena jumped, startled. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was here." The teacher smiled kindly. "Sorry for interrupting. I just couldn't walk away. You play with so much feeling." She smiled shyly. "Thank you. I was just practicing," he nodded. "The principal told me you might perform at the event." "That's wonderful. The students will love it." She laughed nervously. "I'm still thinking about it." The teacher looked at her gently. "You should do it. You've got something rare, something that touches people. Don't hide it anymore." His words stayed with her the rest of the day. Later that week, the music teacher approached her with a new idea. "Lena," he said, "how about you guide a few students before the concert? Some of them are struggling with stage fear and technique. You could really help them." Lena was surprised. "Me teach?" He nodded. "You have experience and they look up to you now. Even a few lessons from you could change how they feel about music." She thought about it for a moment. "All right," she said softly. "I'll try." The next afternoon, 3 students gathered in the music room with her. They looked nervous but excited. "We heard you play the other day," one of them said. "It was amazing." Lena smiled warmly. "Thank you. But remember, music isn't just about being perfect. It's about feeling every note you play." She sat at the piano and showed them how to move their fingers lightly, how to breathe with the rhythm, how to let the sound carry their emotions. The students watched in awe. She wasn't strict or demanding. She was patient, gentle, and encouraging. After their short lesson, one of the students said, "I've never felt so confident playing before." "Thank you." Lena's heart swelled with happiness. She realized that teaching music gave her just as much joy as playing it. Word spread quickly that she was helping students, and soon more wanted to learn from her. Every day after her cleaning shift, she stayed back to guide them. Sometimes they practiced simple melodies. Other times they talked about how music made them feel. The students began calling her Miss Lena, and to her surprise, the nickname made her smile. She felt like she had found her place again. As the concert approached, excitement filled the school. Posters went up on the walls and everyone talked about who would perform. Lena saw her own name on the list, something she hadn't expected. The principal had written, "Special performance by Lena, a hidden talent among us." She blushed when she saw it, feeling both proud and nervous. The day before the concert, she stayed late to rehearse. The music room was empty and quiet. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play the same classical piece that had surprised everyone before. This time, though, it sounded even more powerful. Every note came from her heart, carrying years of pain, hope, and rediscovered joy. When she finished, she looked up to see the music teacher standing at the door again, smiling softly. "You're ready," he said. She nodded, though her heart still raced. "I hope so." That night, Lena could hardly sleep. She lay in bed thinking about her journey. The young girl who once dreamed of becoming a great pianist, the woman who gave up her dream to take care of her family, and the janitor who rediscovered her passion by accident. Now she was about to play again in front of a crowd. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. The next morning was the day of the concert. The auditorium buzzed with energy. Parents, students, and teachers filled the seats. The stage was beautifully decorated and the piano shone under the soft lights. Lena waited backstage, her hands slightly shaking. She could hear the audience clapping for the performers before her. The music teacher came over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll do great," he said gently. She smiled nervously. "Thank you." When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The applause was warm and genuine. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath. The lights above her felt bright but comforting. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first note echoed beautifully through the hall, followed by another and another. The melody grew richer, fuller, filling every corner of the room. People leaned forward, completely drawn in. As she played, she forgot about the audience, the fear, and the years of silence. All she could feel was the music flowing through her. Every note told a story of struggle, hope, and rediscovery. The audience sat quietly, mesmerized. Some even wiped away tears. By the time she played the final note, there was complete silence. And then slowly the entire hall erupted into applause. It was loud, heartfelt, and endless. Lena stood, her eyes wet with emotion. She bowed slightly, smiling through her tears. The principal stood too, leading a standing ovation. The students she had helped cheered the loudest. In that moment, she didn't feel like a janitor or an ordinary woman anymore. She felt like herself, the musician she had always been. After the concert, people surrounded her, congratulating her, thanking her for her performance. "You made me cry," one student said. "It was so beautiful." Another added, "You inspired me to keep practicing." The teachers smiled proudly and the principal said, "Lena, you've reminded us all that talent and passion never fade. They just wait for the right moment to shine." That evening, as Lena walked home under the stars, she felt light, free, and full of peace. The night air was cool and the echo of applause still filled her mind. She whispered to herself, "Music never left me. It was always here." She smiled, knowing this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. The world had finally seen her not as an ordinary woman, but as the genius she had always quietly been. After the concert, Lena's life began to change in quiet but powerful ways. The next morning when she walked into the school, she was greeted not just as a worker but as someone truly respected. The principal stopped by to thank her again. The teachers waved from their classrooms and the students smiled whenever she passed. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen not for what she did, but for who she was. Her story spread quickly beyond the school. A local newspaper heard about the janitor who amazed everyone with her piano skills and asked to interview her. Lena hesitated at first, shy about all the attention. She didn't play for fame or praise. She played because music was a part of her soul, but the principal encouraged her gently. "Sometimes," he said, "your story can inspire others to believe in themselves." And so she agreed. When the article was published, it touched hearts all over town. People who had known her for years were shocked to learn that the quiet woman who cleaned their children's classrooms was a trained pianist. Some even came to the school to thank her for reminding them that it's never too late to chase forgotten dreams. Strangers began sending letters, some sharing how they too had given up something they loved because of life's hardships. Reading those words brought tears to Lena's eyes. She realized that her story was no longer just her own. It had become a message of hope for others. One afternoon, the principal called her into his office. He smiled warmly and handed her a small envelope. "This came for you," he said. Inside was an invitation from the city's cultural center. They were hosting a charity concert to support young musicians and wanted her to perform as a special guest. Lena stared at the letter, speechless. "Me? They want me to play?" she asked softly. The principal nodded proudly. "Yes, you've earned it." That night she sat on her bed holding the letter, her mind spinning with emotion. She thought of the journey she had taken, the years of silence, the moment she touched the piano again, and how everything had changed since. A part of her was nervous. The other part couldn't stop smiling. For so long she had believed that her time had passed. But now life was giving her another chance. In the weeks leading up to the concert, Lena practiced whenever she could. After finishing her work at school, she stayed in the music room, lost in the melodies. Sometimes students would stop by to listen. They would sit quietly, their eyes wide with admiration. "Miss Lena, can you teach us that piece?" they would ask. She always smiled and said, "Of course." Slowly, music became part of the school's heart again. Laughter, piano notes, and inspiration filled the halls. The day of the charity concert finally arrived. The grand auditorium was filled with people, musicians, families, teachers, and children. Lena waited backstage, her hands trembling slightly. She looked around and saw the younger performers warming up, their excitement contagious. One of them, a little girl of about 10, came up to her. "I read about you," she said shyly. "You make me want to play piano forever." Lena's eyes softened. She knelt down and smiled at the girl. "Then promise me you'll never stop," she said gently. The girl nodded eagerly and hugged her before running off to the stage. When it was her turn to perform, Lena stepped into the bright lights once again. The audience clapped warmly, and she took her seat at the grand piano. For a moment, she looked out into the crowd and saw familiar faces, the principal, the music teacher, and many of her students. Their smiles gave her strength. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The melody began softly like a whisper. It grew richer with each note, telling a story of pain, courage, and rediscovery. Every key she touched carried a memory. The struggle of her past, the laughter of her students, the kindness of those who believed in her. As the music filled the hall, the crowd fell completely silent. It was as if the entire room was breathing with her rhythm. Her performance was not just a song. It was a life poured into music. When the final note echoed, there was a pause, a sacred stillness, before the audience rose to their feet in applause. People clapped, cheered, and some even cried. Lena bowed deeply, her heart full. She couldn't believe this was happening. The woman who once mopped floors was now standing on stage as an honored guest. It was a moment she would never forget. After the concert, the event organizer approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your music touched everyone tonight," she said. "Would you be willing to mentor some of our young performers in the future?" Lena smiled warmly. "I'd be honored," she replied. And just like that, a new chapter of her life began. Over the next few months, Lena started teaching part-time at the Cultural Center. She continued working at the school, but now her evenings were filled with music lessons. Her students adored her because she didn't just teach notes, she taught feelings. She told them, "When you play, don't just think of the keys. Think of your heart. Let it speak through your fingers." Her lessons became so popular that the center created a special program under her name, the Hidden Talent Initiative, dedicated to helping people rediscover their passions, no matter their age or background. The teachers at school often said that Lena brought something special to their community. The students became more curious about music, and some even began composing their own songs. The school principal once said during an assembly, "Lena reminded us that talent doesn't fade. It only waits for the right time to shine." The entire hall applauded her as she stood shyly among them, smiling. One evening, months later, Lena returned home after teaching her last class of the day. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by her window, watching the city lights. The sound of distant traffic mixed softly with the memory of her piano's melody. She thought about how life had changed, how one small moment had opened doors she never thought existed. She realized that sometimes miracles happen not through grand plans, but through simple acts of courage like saying yes to a challenge, or daring to touch an old piano again. As she looked around her modest apartment, her eyes fell on a framed photo resting on her table. It was from the charity concert, her standing beside her students, all smiling proudly. She touched the frame gently and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude for the applause or recognition. It was gratitude for life giving her a second chance to do what she loved. That weekend, Lena returned to the school music room early in the morning. The sunlight poured through the windows and dust sparkled in the golden light. She sat at the piano once again. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, and a peaceful smile crossed her face. This time she didn't play for anyone else. She played for herself. The notes rose and fell, carrying a calm joy that filled the room. Her journey had come full circle. As she played, a few students peeked in quietly, listening from the door. They didn't interrupt. They knew this was her moment, a moment between her and the music that had always been her companion. The melody drifted through the hallway, soft and warm, wrapping the school in a feeling of peace. When she finally finished, she closed the piano lid gently and sat still for a moment. Her heart was calm. She knew that even if she never played on a grand stage again, she had already found what she was meant to do: share music, kindness, and hope. She didn't need fame or fortune. She had something far greater: purpose. Before leaving the room, she looked back at the piano one last time. "Thank you for finding me again," she whispered. Then she smiled and walked out, her steps light and steady. And from that day on, every time someone walked past the music room, they could almost hear a faint echo of her playing, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most ordinary people, and that true genius doesn't need to be seen to be real. It just needs to be heard.